Hey guys. So I got a lot of responses to a particular section of my post about Gawker the other day. Um, Specifically, like the economics of book publishing and media and writing. I got a lot of questions and I got a lot of pushback. I don't particularly want to write like a video, do like an essay about it. So I just thought I'd make a brief video and include it in this digest post. So if you think so, I guess the first question is like the "Who do you think you are?" question. Like why do you feel qualified to talk about this? I'm not an expert and would never represent myself as an expert in this or pretty much any other topic. I come to this from this perspective of being a guy who's a writer and a professional writer who's been one for a long time. I'm someone who had, by any account, a very successful freelancing career. I wrote for the New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times and Harper's and the Guardian and the New Republic and Politico and N Plus One and Playboy and on and on. I was pretty successful at that. I've had a blogging presence for a long time that is not like super high readership, but that was influential and that had enough to sort of build up an audience. I had a book published with one of the big five publishers. It hasn't sold great. It has been doing a lot better the last couple months than it was when it first came out. But I guess in not selling much, it kind of makes me more equipped to talk about like the reality for most writers, right? And anyway, I wrote a proposal. I got an agent. I sold it. I got the book published. It was reviewed in a few places. So that's part of my experience. And also, I'm on this Substack now. I am the Substack Pro program, but my subscription revenues are going to be higher than the Pro contract that I get by the end of the year. So, I think by any means, it's been a financial success. So I'm just coming to you from like that perspective. But please get other people's opinions, read other things from people about these issues if you're interested. I have always heard a lot from young writers of various stripes who want to get into the business or whatever. I think for a couple reasons, and then one of them is just that I appear more accessible than some other writers who maybe seem more remote. But also, there's also a lot of young writers who are alienated from what they see as the political culture of writing. And I'm not part of that culture. So anyway, but I'm just a guy, so I don't claim to know everything about this. So please do your research, do your homework. So to respond to some specific things, the first is that book publishing has always been this way. So it's no surprise that most people who sell books don't make any money on them. That's always been true. You shouldn't create an unfair expectation that there was a time when most people who wrote books were making their living writing books. I think this is an example of yelling at me about something that I didn't say. I've never said that most people did. I think that the average amount of the advance matters. I think the percent of books that are earning out matters, and I just think that degree matters. So no doubt, most people who were selling books for even in the heyday of publishing, most of the authors were not just making the bulk of or all of their income from their books. But I suspect that a larger percentage was able to do that at that time. And again, the advances were higher, even though inflation is a thing, and that matters. Okay, so I think degree matters a lot. Is it related? Some people say, well, who cares what Stephen King got? That was an outlier. That's true. Why do you care what people at the top get? Well, I think number one, like what people at the top get is reflective of what's happening farther down the ladder, right? Like, the fact that the seven-figure paydays are going to, Simone Biles, I'm sure, will put out a memoir next year, and she will get, $5 million advance for that. And that's, good for her, but, the fact that sort of category of advance is now dominantly taken up by people who were famous in other contexts is meaningful for people who want to be writing stars, right? It's just hard to get the Jonathan Franzen treatment now. The Tom Wolfe treatment essentially doesn't exist, okay? So I think that's relevant, even if obviously it's always going to be relevant to a small number of people relative to who actually makes it, right? Also, a couple of people said, This is misleading to say that the average advance is down because the total amount of advance money going up has never been higher. And I find that not much of a critique. I mean, number one, like, you would certainly hope that the total compensation in any field was going up over time, right? Like, you wouldn't say, if you look at the total amount of doctors' salaries that get paid out in a year, it's higher now than it was 20 years ago. Well, yeah, right. But the other thing is like, I mean, that's just how an average works, right? Like, the fact that the total amount is going up, but the median advance is going down means that it's getting spread thinner and thinner between fewer and fewer people, or more and more people. Which, if you are an individual author who wants to make it, that's profoundly relevant to what you're trying to do, right? Now, there's plenty of people who can tell you better about the economics of book publishing than I can, but as I understand the industry, it's always been, and this is an intensifying dynamic, that most books don't earn back their advance, but the few hits that happen are what power the industry financially and are able to recoup the costs and bring back in the money so that the industry can continue to exist. So, maybe 100 books get published. 90 of those don't sell at all. They don't even earn back their advance. Maybe 7 of those 100 are moderate successes that earn back their advance and make a little bit of money. But then it's that remaining 3 books that are huge hits that pay for everybody else in that. You get completely made up numbers, but you get the point, right? And so it's a buckshot approach, right? You're just trying to hit on something that becomes a big phenomenon, and with that you can pay for everything else that you're doing. I find that kind of disturbingly similar to like VC funding. So if you go into like venture capital of startups, these giant hedge funds and other players or VC funds are like, they're like throwing money around, right? Knowing that the vast majority of the startups that they invest in are never going to pay off, but hoping to get that one Facebook or Google or Uber that's going to pay for the whole thing. And it's sort of where we are with publishing, it seems like. And so my sort of impression, and again, people who know the industry better than I do can correct me, but the reason why the total amount of money going out in advances goes up while the Authors Guild keeps reporting that the median is going down and down. They've been consistent about that for years. I have no idea why they would lie. That's because they're just spreading it more and more thin, so that in the hopes of getting that one big hit. Which again, if you want to be an author, that's very relevant information for you. So anyway, all this comes back to this idea, like, I've always been the first to tell young writers that like the big emotional step they have to do first is to come to terms with the fact that they need to have a day job. Okay, that you have to have a day job. You have to plan on having a day job. And if you get to the point where you are successful enough that you don't have to have one, that's a bonus. A lot of people don't want to hear that. If you're a 21-year-old who's fresh out of college and all you've ever cared about doing is writing, and you've been working on this craft for a long time with the hope of getting out of having to do that sort of thing, then it's probably a strong medicine to have to take to hear, like, almost everybody has a day job. But I think it's really important to say, let's abstract out from like book publishing. You just look at like writing writ large. You look at like big time freelance magazine writers, okay? People who command serious paychecks with the pieces that they publish, and who are names in the industry, and who put out 3 or 4 pieces a year, but they're all blockbusters in the biggest publications. Many or most of those people do not make the bulk of their income as writers, okay? Like, established freelancers almost never, in my experience, are making the majority of their income from the writing that they sell to magazines or newspapers or whatever, okay? They're making their money in PR, public relations. They're making their money with copywriting, so writing for advertisements. They're making their money with ghostwriting, which I've done some of, which can be very well paying. They're making their money with like consulting, which Nobody knows what that is or why people pay for it, but they do pay for it a lot. And some of the biggest writers that you've ever heard of, some of the most successful writers in the business, simply are not deriving their paychecks from their writing. Now, those are all sort of writing-related things, and there's nothing nefarious about this at all, right? Like, people have to pay the rent, and unfortunately, the kind of creative and argumentative and journalistic writing that many of us value a great deal just doesn't pay the bills usually. Okay, and also even some staff writers at some pretty fancy places also get a very healthy portion of their income from these sort of ancillary duties. I'm sure it depends on the contract that they have with these particular places, but like, it's not as rosy in those positions as you might think. So notoriously, I'm not sure they might have changed this recently, but for the longest time, New Yorker staff writers. So the New Yorker is the pinnacle of American magazines, right? It's the most prestigious. It's the one everybody wants to write for. They did not receive health insurance as staff writers. Okay, 5 or 6 years ago, there was a scandal because the Atlantic had asked somebody professional writer to publish something for free. And a lot of people at the time were like, well, what the hell, right? Like, if the Atlantic can't pay, who can? And this is a thing that I think is really important for you to understand. Like, your assumptions about who will pay a good freelance wage to you based on their relative prestige is probably wrong. Okay? Look, like, yeah, the New York Times Magazine paid me $2 a word. That was great. Harper's paid me $1 a word, but they paid me based on the amount that I turned in for my initial draft, not for what got whittled down by 1,500 words. So, that was very nice of them. One of the best paydays I ever got was from the Dow Jones Company, who's launching a new magazine, and my piece got spiked, and they gave me the full freight anyway, which is a funny story I can tell sometime. So these things do happen, but like, you shouldn't hear that the Atlantic is like slumming it and offering people like $200 or whatever it is, whatever, or publication like that. If you hear something like that, you have to understand that like that's not that uncommon. And if you just assume this is a high profile, high circulation, high prestige publication, therefore when I work myself up to the point where I get to write for them, I'm finally going to start getting paid, that's a bad assumption. Okay? I can tell you that for the record. Some of the most prestigious places that I wrote for were, I almost treated them like loss leaders, right? Because I was turning around 2,000 words for $250, and I was doing it just to get my name, in their publication and to sort of have that to add to my credits. Okay, so you have to be aware of that. So all of this sort of comes down to like, you got to have a day job. You got to plan on having a day job. That is a time-honored tradition. I've mentioned before that Octavia Butler was a potato chip inspector for like 10 years or something like that. Okay, so Wallace Stevens, who's probably the greatest American poet of all time, was an insurance executive his whole life because he was incredibly dedicated to true independence. All kinds of people have day jobs, and it's fine. It's like, can you find a day job you can live with? One that you're not embarrassed to tell your friends about? Can you find a day job that is at least somewhat related to what you're doing in your writing world? For many people, the pinnacle of that is sort of being a professor. I think that's a dangerous way to go because the tenure requirements and the rate of publishing that you have to be doing nowadays to survive in academia is going to suck up all your writing time, but some people are very successful with that sort of a setup. So, but yeah, you got to have a day job. You got to get, if you're in college or you're looking forward to this, you have to get used to that idea now, and you have to negotiate the job market and what you can do and where you can pay your rent to be able to support yourself as a writer. And maybe someday you'll be able to just be a writer. And I say this feeling a little bit like a hypocrite because I am just a writer now. Because I'm someone who's lucky enough to have sort of caught this wave of the crowdfunded economy. When my Substack Pro contract expires next March, I will be getting a bump up in pay because again, I'll be earning more in subscription fees than they're paying me. I'm very, very grateful for the contract that they gave me. And that's a very privileged place to be in, and there are very, very few writers out there who can just say straight up, like, my income is writing. That's where I get it from. I could talk a lot about how that happened for me, but I think the biggest thing is, I have said I'm going to put some links in the digest post, the things I've written in this regard before, but you have to develop a distinctive voice that captures the attention of a usually small but particularly passionate audience. Okay, so I have for 15 years almost now been developing and very consciously developing an audience that has followed me from place to place, put up with a lot of my stuff, and is now paying for my life. People don't want to acknowledge that I have this audience because they don't like me or my writing, which is fine. But it's, whatever you think about, me and my writing and my history or whatever, I'm making a lot of money as a writer now. And I'm doing it because for, over 13 years, I carefully cultivated a particular writing persona, wrote about certain things, tried to apply myself with integrity, and developed a particular reputation among a group of people who are not very big. I think like 12,000 total people on my mailing list, maybe more, and like 3,000 paying subscribers. So that's not a lot of people, but they're passionately invested in what I do in general, and so that's why I can afford to live the life that I did. I don't know where all this crowdfunding stuff is going to go. There's a lot of people who say that the money's all going to dry up. A lot of them are sort of in traditional media, which for some very obvious reasons doesn't like crowdfunded media. So I'm not sure if I trust them. But if my life is a testimony to anything, it's that reversals of fortune happen all the time. So the week that Substack got in touch with me, I had just accepted a job, a $15 an hour job, at a junk removal company here in Brooklyn. Okay, I'm very happy to be doing this instead, but I am also 100% aware that a year from now, I could be right back on the job market looking for a $15 an hour job. And if that happens, I'll handle it because I've always handled everything before. But do your own work, write good shit, get good at it, care about your craft, develop a persona that is not the same overbearingly woke white person progressive persona that everybody else is writing with, and try to find your niche. But yeah, you got to get lucky too, because I think the one thing that we should say about all of this is, as depressing as those numbers are about like the economics of books, that's the creative fields in general right now. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of YouTube channels that make no money. And are trying to make money and make no money for every YouTube channel that succeeds, right? That all of this is a power law distribution. And a lot of it is luck. A lot of it is luck and then path dependence, right? The right people read me at the right time, which got my first little blogger blog some notoriety, which got it picked up and in conversation with people who were writing for big deal places, which then eventually got those big deal places to ask me to write for them, okay, and give me money and so on, okay? If things break a little bit differently, who knows? I could easily not have this profession. So, I don't know, do the best that you can, but for God's sakes, be something, be some individual writer with a particularly, individual and weird point of view that only you could write, right? And then maybe you'll get lucky and be somebody that's on the right side of this power law distribution, okay? But you can't get lucky in that way unless there's some reason for them to see you, some reason for the audience to find you. And such a huge number of writers right now, there's no reason for an audience to find them because the only thing that they write is the same woke posturing that everybody else writes. That market is completely flooded. So you have to come up with something else. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Thanks, guys.